Okay, we're going live now. Just give it one moment.
Great. All right, looks like our participants are popping in and we're now live. So I would love to start. So welcome everyone to the Plan International USA's Youth Advocacy Panel for our Summer Youth Leadership Academy. We're having a very special talk with our social activists, Deja Fox and Nupol Kiazolu.
Okay, we're going live now. Just give it one moment.
Oh, okay. Should I read?
Nope, go ahead, Luna.
All right, so I'll introduce myself first and I'll pass it on to our two wonderful activists here with us today. My name is Luna Abadia. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a member of the Plan USA Youth Advisory Board. I'm also the founder and executive director of a climate initiative called the Effective Climate Action Project. All right, I'll kick it off let me introduce a little bit more about the experience that we'll be having today. So today's audience is comprised of a group of incredible young leaders who are at the forefront of movements today. These leaders are in the second day of the Youth Leadership Academy, which is an online summit run by Plan USA, gathering motivated youth from across the United States. Over the course of the Academy, we've focused on building our leadership and youth-led advocacy skills. We've been unpacking the Sustainable Development Goals, and soon every participant will be designing a project that addresses a social justice issue in their own community that they will be implementing with support from Plan mentors. So these youth are really the definition of young and powerful, and they're all so excited to welcome our guests here today. To our panelists, we're really grateful to have you both here at the YLA to talk about your activism and advocacy work and to help our network learn from you and to be inspired by you. Just a quick note that our YLAers and audience members may ask our panelists questions at any time throughout the session using the Q&A function at below on your screen, and we'll answer as many as we can by the end of our discussion. So I'd love to kick it over and introduce our first participant here, our first speaker, which is Deja Fox. She is at the forefront of the reproductive rights movement. She started the Reproductive Health Access Project, ensuring that young people in Tuscan have equal and affordable access to reproductive health care throughout their lives. She is also building a special interest community for first-generation low-income students at Columbia University, and she founded the Gen Z Girl Gang, which is a community of young women and females redefining sisterhood in the era of social media. Next, we have Nupol Kiazolu. She has been at the front rights of the Charlottesville protests, and she is an award-winning civil rights activist, organizer, and Miss Liberia USA. She founded We Protect Us, an organization to empower disenfranchised Black and Brown communities through mutual aid, education, violence prevention services, and sustainable resources. And she even founded Vote 2000 to get young people and Brown people registered to vote, and partnered with the website dosomething.org. All right, so now let's hear from you both. Could you introduce yourselves, maybe your name, what school you are at, and where you're studying and where you're currently living, as well as your areas of advocacy and maybe your most current project?
I can get us started. My name is Deja Fox. I use she and her pronouns. I'm calling in from San Diego, California, but I'm a junior at Columbia University, where I'm the first in my family to attend college. I got my start in the reproductive justice movement, fighting for sex education, born out of my own experiences with housing insecurity and hidden homelessness. Then I grew my advocacy to include things like birth control access, and then transitioned when I moved to New York City, founded Gen Z Girl Gang, which is a community of young women and femmes redefining sisterhood and experimenting with the ways we use social media as a community building tool. And then I worked as the youngest staffer on any of the 2020 presidential campaigns for Kamala Harris. I now do a lot of work at the intersection of social media and social justice and building strategies to reimagine the ways that we use online influence to create change.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Nepal Kiazolu again. I'm 21 years old. I am a first generation college student at the illustrious Hampton University, and I'm currently majoring in political science on the pre-law track. I'm also a civil rights activist and organizer from Brooklyn, New York, and specifically Brownsville. Very proud of my community and where I come from. And I've been doing this work for almost a decade. Next year, I got my start in activism at the age of 12 years old, and I haven't stopped since.
Thank you both. That's wonderful. So you both work on different social justice issue causes and have launched many incredible projects. But at the root of your cause, what inspired you to advocate in the first place?
I always say that when you're looking how to get started, you should think about what's personal to you. And that was definitely my experience. I grew up in a household like so many others across the nation with a single mom, one that struggled to cover the basics like rent and food. And by the time I was 15, my mom had really struggled with substance abuse. And I ended up moving out and I experienced what 1 in 30 teens in the US experience. And that's called hidden homelessness. It looks like bouncing around between friends' houses. I ended up living with a significant other and their family. And it was through that lens, through that experience, that I not only was no longer able to participate in leadership in my school, right? I didn't get reelected to student council. I didn't make the volleyball team. But I also found leadership outside of school and a real purpose around reforming the sex education in my school district, which was last updated in the 80s. Didn't even mention consent. And so obviously as someone who didn't have parents at home to fill in those gaps, this was personal to me, right? Someone who was living with their significant other at the time. And so I started showing up to school board meetings and I would tell my personal story, those issues of homelessness and why it was so important to me and my aspirations to go on to college. And then I would bring my friends, my personal network along to do the same. And so when I think about how it is that I got started and how others can sort of get their own start, I like to remind people to think of issues that are affecting you personally. Then think about how you can use your personal story as an agent of change making and how you can bring your personal network, your friends, family, neighbors in along with you. Because if they care about you, they're going to care about what you care about.
That's such a good point. Yeah, we talked about the impact of storytelling in our past session as well, and how that can really bring a personal lens to that as well. Yeah, what about you, Nupal?
So I always say to people that I didn't choose activism. Activism chose me. As a young Black woman in this country, I don't really have the privilege nor luxury to sit back and do nothing when my people are dying. After Trayvon Martin was murdered, a spark set off within me. And I was 12 years old when I first learned about his case and his tragic death. And for the first time in my life, it forced me to come to face with what it means to be young and Black in this country. And so I came up with this idea to organize a silent protest at my school. And I was in the South at the time, in Georgia, and racial tensions are already very, very high in the South. And I remember when Trayvon Martin's murder was circulating everywhere, the tensions were just like at an all-time high at that moment. But nonetheless, I stood for what I believed in. I came up with this idea to put a gray hoodie on and take this message to my back stating, do I look suspicious? And then I went to 7-Eleven to get Skittles and iced tea to represent what Trayvon had in his hand at the time of his murder. So long story short, I went to my school the following day, hoodie on, message taped to my back. And I was in a predominantly white middle school with predominantly white staff, and it caused a lot of controversy. My teachers felt like I was being too political, and the only ally I had at the time was my math teacher, who's a Black woman. And I ended up getting written up for suspension by my history teacher. Went to my math teacher, I said, yo, Miss Gibbs, I'm about to get suspended. This is what it is. So this lady literally risked her entire career by marching down to the principal's office with me in solidarity. We debated back and forth with the principal. He sent me home to do my research, have my case ready for him the following morning. That's exactly what I did. I looked up my rights as a middle school student, my First Amendment rights. And then I came across the Supreme Court case Tinker versus Des Moines, which in short is a Supreme Court case that established the right for students to peacefully organize within school grounds. That was the focal point of my argument the following morning. My teacher was right there with me again. I ended up winning the case. And my principal was so shocked that I brought up that Supreme Court case. He was like, how the heck do you know about that at 12 years old? And I was like, you told me to do my research. So that's exactly what I did. By the time we left this office, it was lunchtime. My teacher and I went to the cafeteria. And when we got there, literally every single student in there had their hoodies on with the same exact message taped to their backs. And my teacher and I just stood there in awe and cried. And at that moment, I knew that being an activist and organizer was my calling, and I hadn't stopped since. So that's my story into activism.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, it's wonderful to see the impact that one action can create this ripple effect within many. I feel like you've both spoken to how you got started and what your personal journey was, but what does being an advocate or activist mean to you? Like when you hear that word, do you identify with it, and what does it signify within you?
Yeah, I think when I think about having an activist mindset or an organizer mindset, I'm reminded that you can do that you can carry that with you in any job, career, or setting, right? That you can be an activist on your campus. You can be an activist, should you choose to work in coding, right? Or anywhere that you are. You can bring these ideals of creating change in the environment you're in exactly to where you are. And that is actually what makes each and every one of us so valuable in this work, right? We each bring different skills, and we each occupy different social circles. And that's really how we do this work, right? We can't all do the exact same thing in the exact same place. And so I kind of like to think of it, you can almost envision it like a through line, right? And you'll have all these different careers, being a student, moving on to your first job, and then your career, and you'll hold all of these different titles. But when you think about what your through line is, the thing that you bring with you into each and every role that you fill, I think that we can incorporate activism into that. And so in so many ways, I think it's so much more about how we show up in our everyday lives and our personal lives than any title, right? I think even our relationships can be activism, the way that we affirm others, the ways that we bring others up and along and help them see their potential maybe when they don't, is activism. So I think my biggest message here is that to me, being an activist isn't necessarily a job or a career, but rather a through line and a value.
Thank you.
I absolutely agree with what Deja just said. And just to echo what she said, there are so many different ways to show up in this movement. When people see activists, they think that there's just one front in this movement, like people have to have thousands of followers or have to be an influencer with over 10K on social media. And I'm like, no, like you don't need all that stuff to be an activist or to define what your work looks like in this movement. Anyone can be an influencer, quite frankly. You can influence the people that you live with. You can influence your friends to do better and show up for change and social good. It really just depends on how you determine what that looks like for you and whatever capacity that you can serve. Because again, as we stated before, there's so many different ways. Like if you're a doctor, there's Black women dying right now at an alarming rate in hospitals. You can be that doctor or that nurse that speaks up for the Black woman no one else is listening to and save her life. If you're a teacher, we need educators now more than ever. Teachers have such a great responsibility in this world. They are literally building up the next generation of the leaders in this country and across the world. Like there are just so many different examples. If you cook, child, we'd be hungry on the front lines after all that marching. So you can bring us some plates and we will be A-okay and happy with that. There are just so many different ways that you can show up in this movement, and it is worthy. Like, don't let outside forces like followers on social media, press, and all that determine your worth and how you feel about how you show up in this movement. As long as you are using discernment, you are open-minded, listening to others' experiences around you, and organizing in community with whatever you do, work in community, because we are so much more stronger and powerful together. That's what matters. And that's what being an activist means to me.
Definitely. And I really like how you speak to that idea of defining what you see as success in your own level, because we all have those places that we can impact, and it doesn't have to be that public influencer sphere that so many of us see as the one and only way to go about being an activist. And so I think coming back to those personal relationships that each of us hold and the changes that we can make within that is something incredibly important. Yeah, all right. So you both have spoken about these moments that you had, these moments that changed the way in which you saw the issues that were so intertwined with your own identity. I would love to hear, and I think many of the youth listening would love to hear, how did you change from that personal moment in which you gained awareness and those first actions of activism that you took to actually creating and founding your own organizations?
I think that one of my biggest lessons is to do what is uncomfortable but not unsafe. And so remembering to start small is really important. And I think when I highlight my journey, right, I talk about sharing my story first at a school board meeting where there was maybe 5 school board members and like 10 people who happened to show up to this local meeting, right? And that obviously is a very different experience than the one I would have just a year later when I was 16 and I went viral at a town hall where there was maybe 8,000 people in the room. And then subsequently the next day, 18 million people had viewed my video, heard me speak, heard my story. And so I think about the jump between the young woman who was 15 holding like a Post-it note, sitting down crying after having told her story for the first time at a school board meeting, and then the young woman who was 16 who was able to stand up to and then go on CNN and defend herself live the next day and show up in his office on the steps of Capitol Hill, right? But those are very different experiences. But because I started small and because I put in the work to be consistent and to grow my skills and grow my confidence and grow my advocacy, I was able to show up in bigger ways. And then that then led to me founding my own organization or co-founding an organization, the El Rio Reproductive Health Access Project, which I co-founded with other youth who were experiencing homelessness, formerly incarcerated youth, teen moms, who then served as paid peer sex educators. To this day, they still do, actually. It's a self-sustaining program. And they get paid to work as peer sex educators in local clinics and consult with youth who come in, who then can receive birth control, STI testing, PrEP and PEP at absolutely no cost to them. And they've served tens of thousands of young people in my hometown. And so again, it's about building, right? We don't always just jump in the deep. And I actually think that it's ill-advised to do so. It's actually much better to start off in those smaller capacities to learn your skills and to really understand deeply what is already out there. So we're not replicating each other's work. And so, yeah, I would say start small, start personal, and then let it continue to grow naturally and in its own way when you feel comfortable, ready, and you see a real need.
I think that's another great point that you bring up about not replicating other people's work, because I think there's so many areas that need our youth voices and our attention, but also being aware of the scope around you and what other people are already doing and dedicating their careers and lives to tackling is something really important, because the more we can unite our collective missions and work together to actually support each other as activists, I think the greater our impact will be. Yeah. Nupol, do you want to speak to that, or do you have anything
absolutely.
to add?
So I got my start off with grassroots organizing right within my local community of Brownsville, Brooklyn, and all across New York City. I am from the hood. To keep it straight up with y'all, I am in Brownsville right now, and I grow as a young person growing up in the hood in Brownsville, Brooklyn. There are so many external factors that affect our daily lives, from poverty to gun violence to the lack of resources within our schools. There's just so many different factors that impact how we navigate on a day-to-day basis. So I identified the needs within my community and built with other people before I started my organization, which just launched about 2 months ago, which is entitled We Protect Us. But this was like years of organizing with different organizations. I've held many titles and hats, and I've learned so much. And I'm also a part of a research team that's been gathering data from cities all across America to create trauma-informed solutions on how to better protect and serve our communities. So with my background in research and data, collecting qualitative and quantitative, this is like the researcher in me popping out right now, but data on how to really serve our communities in the greatest capacity and what lawmakers can do to serve our communities, because that's their jobs. With all of that combined, I was able to finally push out We Protect Us, which is an organization dedicated to serving Black and Brown communities, starting in New York City, and then we will eventually expand nationally in order to provide them with the necessary resources, not only to survive, but thrive. And we do all of this in community. I'm really, really proud to say that my organization, its first service project was organizing a peace treaty between the Bloods and Crips in New York City, and specifically Brooklyn, with two major sets. And that was done through community. And that was done because they know me. They were able to identify me as a change agent in my community, and they trusted the work that I do. So it's really important before you even start an organization, you have to build that rapport within your community. Your community has to be able to identify you as someone that is trustworthy and someone that is truly dedicated to empowering and bettering that community. Otherwise, who are you serving and why are you doing it?
Thank you. Yeah. Another thing about you both is that you were first generation college students. And I know, given that you've also participated in marches and protests and come an incredibly long way in your life and in your activism journeys. And so I'd love to hear if there are any barriers that you have faced. I'm sure there's many that have come along the way. And how did you overcome them?
When I was, in high school, I was experiencing homelessness, right? I worked at a gas station after school. I would get out of school at 3:10. I'd work 3:30 to 10 p.m. And then on the weekends, work 5:30 a.m. to 2 p.m. And so you can imagine trying to hold down AP classes and grades on top of a job to just survive, on top of organizing work to fulfill, what was important to me and make the change that I personally needed to see to be successful, right? That's like 3 full-time jobs. And so when I think about what people could have done better for me, 2 things come to mind. First, we need to be paying our young people, point blank period, right? Young people doing change-making work need to get paid. It is actually, it is excluding the youth who are most affected if we do not create paid positions, right? Because young people who are low income are being excluded when we don't pay. And so that first and foremost needs to happen. That needs to be the norm. The second thing is that we need to stop using young people only as implementers, right? So often it's these adults who are creating the strategies, creating the messages, and then asking young people to be the mouthpieces, asking young people to go do the door knocking, do the marching, but not including them on the inside. And so what we need to be doing, and this is really, you could push for this in any organization you're in, is we need to be putting youth at the highest levels of leadership. That means on our boards. I was on the board for Planned Parenthood Arizona. And we need to be putting them into our rooms of in the capacity of strategists and messengers, and redefining the way that we think of who is qualified to include the lived experiences of young people and people in general.
As a young Black woman navigating this movement, my experience has not been easy. Obviously, I deal with racism on a day-to-day basis. The lack of protection for Black women in this space is a conversation that isn't had enough. And that's why when I get this question, it is always important for me to amplify the struggles that Black women and Black trans women and Black queer folks experience in the activism space and world. And it's super important that we have these uncomfortable conversations, because out of that uncomfortability comes productivity. So we really have to do a better job at amplifying the voices and the work of Black women and Black trans women and Black queer folks all together. Ageism, as a young Black woman, a lot of times I've had so many adults tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm too young. You don't have enough life experience. If I'm old enough to get pulled over by a police officer and potentially hurt or killed, then I'm old enough to talk about the experiences I go through on a day-to-day basis. So age is quite literally nothing but a number. Young people are fully capable of articulating their experiences. And that is something that I always have to push back on every single time that I met with ageism. And oftentimes as a Black woman, it can get frustrating because we are then painted as the angry Black woman in this space because we are vocalizing our needs and advocating for ourselves. But I'm here to tell young Black and brown girls everywhere to continue to show up for yourself, and women in general, young women in general, continue to show up for yourselves and advocate for yourselves because it is needed. They may try to paint you as the bad person in the room, but it does not make you bad. In fact, you are opening up so many doors for young women coming behind you and making it a lot less stressful for them, because that moment where you take to advocate for yourself, you don't even know that you are advocating for so many others, and you can be the person that cultivates the change that is needed within that space. So I consistently, advocate for myself and others in spaces where that is not taking place. And I just work to really continue to just be an example of the change that I want to see in this world. But it's definitely not easy navigating ageism, racism, misogyny, and all the other things that we have to deal with as women in this world.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I would love if you could speak a little bit more, Nicole, about your experiences with the Charlottesville protests. And if you have any advice, like what advice would you give young activists who are interested in getting involved in this protesting realm and social policy in general?
Yeah, so I was 17 years old when I went to Charlottesville, Virginia to counter protest against white supremacy. And I made the decision because activists and organizers out on the ground in Charlottesville had reached out to me and some comrades, and they said that, hey, we need bodies on the line right now. There are terrorists coming to our city, coming to our place, and we don't really have enough bodies on the line, and we need to be as organized as possible because things could get really bad really quickly. And so at that moment, I had to make a decision. And I always say that my predecessors that came before me gave up their lives for this cause. So who am I not to? I knew what I was getting myself into. People always ask me, what did you tell your mom when you were leaving? Because I was still underage at the time. I was 17. And I told her I was going to counter protest white supremacy, but I didn't say neo-Nazis or white terrorists or anything like that would be there because I didn't want to scare her, and I'd already made up my mind. Not saying that everyone should do this. This is just what I did. By the time I got to Charlottesville, the moment we stepped out the car, it was so hot and you could literally feel the tension in the air. And to say the experience surviving one of the worst demonstrations in US history, to say it was traumatic is an understatement, but it also opened my eyes to how far we have not come with race relations in America, because this country likes to portray itself as a post-racial utopia. And there are so many modern day examples to prove otherwise. And Charlottesville is one of the most prolific examples as to how far we haven't come in this country. And until we start having those uncomfortable conversations about what racism actually is and who it impacts and who benefits from it, we're going to keep seeing this continuous cycle of race relations boiling over. And then everyone gets on the media and it's like, oh my goodness, this is not who we are. Oh, I've heard that so many times. And I always say, this is exactly who this country is. And until we start acknowledging that and doing right by Black people in this country, we're going to continue to see the same things over and over again. So again, like a lot of people are surprised that I decided to continue my activism work after Charlottesville because of how traumatic it was. Like people literally died. Comrades that I'd seen earlier like 2 hours before, I'm locking arms with them. And then the next minute they're dead on the ground. And it's traumatic, it's horrific, but unfortunately this is where we are. And it pushed me to continue to do this work because we have so much more work to do. And again, I cannot emphasize this enough. We really have to get real in this country about what racism actually is. And we have to have these conversations within our homes because it really does start with us if we want to change these problems.
Thank you. Yeah, we do. I'd love to move on to Deja, and you are the youngest staffer and the first influencer and surrogate strategist on Vice President Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. Could you tell us a little bit more about your experience as well working in politics?
Yeah, I mean, it's from what I've told you already. I got my start in issue-based politics, so fighting around an issue, right? Not working for a candidate, but rather working toward an issue. But I got my start before Donald Trump, right? And I say this all the time. I started this work before him, and I'll be doing it long after he's gone, frankly. And in part, my transition into the electoral politics side, right, working on behalf of a candidate, was because I was sitting in a classroom reading like Plato, surrounded by only other white kids. I was in a classroom full of white students, and I was like, oh my God, this isn't where I'm supposed to be right now. There's the most important election of our lifetimes. Well, you know what? I wouldn't even say that because I think 2016 was the most important election of our lifetimes, and it just did not go the way that we would have liked it to have gone. So the second most important election of our lifetimes was happening right now, right? Like, if we didn't get a cap on this, if something didn't happen, if we didn't make progress, if we didn't win, all of our issues, right? I'm talking reproductive justice, racial justice, climate justice, were on the line. And that's not to say that electoral politics is the end all be all, it's not. But they absolutely, who is in office changes the landscape for organizers, for change makers on the ground. And so it was through this lens that I decided to make the shift into electoral politics. And I saw that, you know, I have these skills. I've been working in digital marketing around Gen Z for over a year then at that point with major brands like Aussie and Tresemme. You know, I'd been building my own repertoire as an influencer, doing things with Mac and Nike. And I also had this grassroots organizing background with Planned Parenthood around sex education and birth control access. And I was like, I need to do something with this. And it was actually through a mutual connection on the campaign, someone that I'd only ever met digitally, who messaged me, and they sent me a job opening on the campaign, on the digital team. And I was moving into my sophomore year dorm. I was literally unpacking my suitcase, hanging things up, when I got this DM on Instagram. And I messaged her back saying, you know, I have some friends who just graduated and I think they'd be a great fit. I'll pass you along some recommendations tonight. And she was like, no, Deja, I think you would be a great fit. And 2 weeks later, I was packing up my dorm, moving to a city I literally had never been to work a job that didn't exist before I got there at just 19 years old. Being the youngest staffer, not only in my office, but across any of the campaigns. And so, you know, I say all of that to say that you are an expert in your experience and that your perspective, there's always going to be people that have more years of experience than you, know more people, have more money in the bank, but you have your experience and that is your expertise. You have your perspective and that is your power. And your story is unique and it is your own. And when you walk into the room with those things and you know the value that you as an individual bring, you can go anywhere. I took it all the way to a presidential campaign. It took me less than a year, or less than 2 years, about a year and a half. I quit my job at the gas station in 2018. And I started working on the Kamala Harris campaign in 2019. Life changes quick. And when you're surrounding yourself with the right people, making the right connections, and you believe in yourself and your abilities and your experience, there really is no limit.
Thank you. And I think you've been speaking a lot about the opportunities that came to you, but I think it's also important to recognize that you both incredibly fought for this yourselves, and you were the ones to earn it. And so many youth don't have those opportunities to step into those spaces. So I thank you for stepping in and being the first to traverse those paths in such important activist spaces. Deja, I would love to hear, you've of course worked to advance pro-choice legislation and spoken about reproductive rights. You're well known for confronting Senator Flake at the town hall, as you spoke about before. What advice would you give young leaders who are striving to make legislative impact, especially in communities and places where their local congressional representatives' perspectives perhaps don't align with their own?
Yeah, so I'm going to circle back to something I said. Electoral politics is not the end all be all. And you were absolutely right. That confrontation with Senator Flake was because he had just voted to take away my access to birth control through Title X. And that's the program that over 4 million low-income people, primarily Black and Brown women, access birth control through. And so, yes, I stood up and I told my story. And then I went to DC and I lobbied on Capitol Hill. But I want to be very clear that the effort to then defund Planned Parenthood still very much carried through. There was a lot of slashes to the budget for reproductive health care under the Trump administration that we are still trying to fight to get back. And so it was actually through that lens that I was like, I need to create something in my community that is community-based, that is outside of our elected officials, right? And that's how the El Rio Reproductive Health Access Project came to be, because it is, and this sort of speaks to New Paul's ethos too, of like for us and by us, and doesn't sway with the political tides. And I, as someone who, has relied on Title X, so birth control funding through the government, food stamps, food funding through the government, and Section 8, which is the housing funding through the government, I've been so tired of seeing the things that I need to survive just absolutely be swayed by elections, especially as a young person. I only got to vote in this last presidential election. And so in so many ways, when we're thinking about electoral politics, so much of it feels outside of our control. And so yes, absolutely, holding those members to account, working to elect people who are going to create an environment that is healthy, positive, and forward-looking for change makers is incredibly important. But we also should be thinking about how we build community-based initiatives that sustain us even outside of electoral politics.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that's such a good point that you bring up, that like most of us, many activists and youth stepping into these spaces are coming in at a time before we're even given the power to, participate electorally and to vote for the people in power who will be making decisions that impact us deeply. And so realizing that and the power that we do hold, but also stepping into our own abilities and working collectively. So Nupal, I wanted to circle back to the experiences you were mentioning with the Charlottesville protests. And we had a great question from the audience asking if you have any tips for young people of color to fight systemic racism safely.
Absolutely. That is a great question. And I just want to preface it with every protest is not like Charlottesville. Okay. Like majority of the protests that happened, if you have great organizers within your community, they are safe. And we make sure that we keep us safe. So there are protocols on the front lines that we have to follow in order to make sure that everyone is as safe as possible. With my protests, before we even take the streets, I set out the guidelines, and when everyone has to agree, if you don't agree, then you can find yourself another protest. And then we get it popping. We start marching. So the rules that I have for my space is, one, everyone has to feel included, and it has to be an intersectional environment at all times. No racism, no misogyny, no homophobia, no transphobia will be tolerated in any space that I occupy. And if you can't adhere to that, you will absolutely be escorted out. Secondly, we have to make sure that we are keeping each other safe. So no one will be left behind. When we march, if it ever feels like we're at a point where we're getting separated from each other, we'll all slow down or come to a complete stop in order to make sure that everyone is together. And we also encourage people to come to our protests in the buddy system, just in case someone is arrested or you get lost. You'll always have someone that knows where you are at all times. So always share your location with other folks and make sure you bring somebody else with you to make sure that you're safe. And lastly, in terms of health and safety, because sometimes when we're marching, especially in the summer, it can be really, really hot. People can get really exhausted. So in the event of an emergency, we always put up something like this, an X, and we tell people to put this up if you are in need of medical assistance and there are medics on site. Majority of the time that will help, or if not, we'll get you medical assistance as soon as possible. And lastly, I almost forgot this, we do not engage with the police. If there, sometimes, a lot of times, unfortunately, the police can try to start something to agitate the protesters, or we don't engage with agitators as well. They come, certain supporters of a certain person that I shall not name, they come a lot, even though this person lost the presidential election, they are still very much delusional. And they come and they try to incite violence. They try to start arguments. And I tell people at the demonstrations I organize, we will not engage with the police or agitators. We are focused on a mission, which is social justice, which is Black liberation, which is equity for all people. So that's what we're coming here for. We do not come to argue with protesters, agitators, or the police. We are here for a purpose, which is to change the world ultimately. So with all those things I just listed, those are the most effective ways to have your protest as safe as possible, to avoid arrests and to avoid injuries.
Thank you. And outside of just safety, I would love to hear more about how you support and collaborate with other youth activists working towards similar realms of change.
Yes, absolutely. So I always emphasize the importance of organizing within community because it is much more impactful. And I've worked with people all around the country and world, honestly. Like last summer when the Black Lives Matter movement took off and everyone started showing up, it was really, really inspiring to see so many people from all walks of life come together in the name of racial equity and justice. And so social media is such a powerful tool when used correctly. A lot of adults, they just thought young people got on social media to post pictures and look cute, and they didn't think that we were really doing anything worthwhile. But Black Lives Matter is a powerful movement that showed that young people from all around the world are not just using these apps and these platforms to just take pictures and look cute. We are quite literally organizing to change the world. I've connected with so many people around the world to organize, whether it be digitally or in person, because of just an Instagram message or a DM. And after that, we were able to build so much more. I organized one of the largest Black Lives Matter demonstrations in US and world history on June 2nd, 2020. And we brought out over 20,000 people in New York City, and we had the streets flooded, and social media was one of the most important factors into making that protest so impactful and having so many people show up and turn out. So really just using your network and really connecting with folks to organize on a larger scale is incredibly important. So that's how I use my platform and resources to organize in community with other young folks.
Thank you. We have a great audience question from Trinity, a while later I would love to ask and hear your response, Nupal. She says, as an African-American woman interested in advocacy, I really loved hearing your story about standing up and advocating, especially in a predominantly white school. Is there any time when you were too scared to speak up on a certain issue that dealt with racism based on your location?
Oh, that is a great question. And thank you for asking that, Trinity. There has absolutely been times where I was the minority in the room, the only Black person. And it was like, oh my gosh, I'm sure every Black person can relate to this. when we talk about slavery in the class and then all the white people just look at you like, like you are the representative for all Black people. And then like there are just awkward moments, like someone may say something really racist, and as a Black person, you're like, okay, am I overreacting? How should I respond? I feel super uncomfortable because I'm like, I don't have backup. It's just me. I've been in that situation so many times. So I absolutely understand where you're coming from. And I understand why you asked that question. But I've always been someone that has been outspoken naturally. I just do not shut up. And I'm glad I don't. As when I was younger, my mouth used to get me in trouble sometimes because if I felt like something was wrong, I was going to say it. And sometimes adults can view that as talking back. But now, fast forward over 10 years later, it's gotten me to where I am today. So I say all of that to say, even though it may be scary sometimes to speak up and stand up for what's right, it's never a wrong time to stand up for what's right. And you never know how your words will impact somebody else and change their perspective or their lives. So even in that moment of fear, like everyone experiences fear, but you don't let that fear stop you. You don't let that fear stop you from standing up for what you believe in and fighting for the change that's needed in this world. So you work through that fear and you learn so much. If it didn't scare you, then it wouldn't be as important. So everything that's so important to us, everything that drives us, everything that pushes us can scare us sometimes because it's not easy, but it's necessary. And you are so, so powerful, Trinity. And I'm encouraging you to tap into that power that you hold and use it for the better and the greater good. And you are just as powerful, just being who you are right now. And you are the epitome of Black excellence just by your existence right now, because our existence is resistance. And I'm proud of you. Keep going.
Thank you for those words. Yeah. Deja, I would love to hear from you. You have built your own organizations, organized campaigns, and worked with Planned Parenthood. Plan is similar in size to these organizations, and I'd love to hear, as a youth activist, what has your experience been like partnering with other organizations? Our WildLayers are about to start on their own activism journeys and working with Plan International USA, and so I'd love to hear if you have any tips for our young members just beginning this relationship with Plan.
Yeah, I think, this idea of coalition building comes to mind. And coalition building, you can kind of sort of think of as like networking or relationship building between organizations or causes or issues, right? And so I think at the core of our work, remembering that what we do is important, right? What we produce, our metrics, our goals, important, but how we do what we do, in my opinion, is often more important. The people that we include, the people around us that we empower. And so one thing I would stress is that relationship building on that coalition level or on an individual level, especially when you're this young, is so important because things are going to grow and change, issues will develop, people's careers will take different paths, they'll start championing other issues. And so the relationships that you build now, you really have no idea where they'll head in the next 5 years. And Paul and I have been friends, I think now like 3 years. And we were definitely in very different spaces when we met. And so thinking about really building for the long term. And I think something that I stress is this idea of movement building, right? That it's so much more than just hitting some metric. And I think often when we're working in grant spaces or we have to like perform at some level, we're really caught up in these ideas of metrics. But instead thinking about the how over the what, building your own leadership, empowering the leaders around you, and remembering that that is movement building because these people are the people who power movements. I'll also emphasize that with my organization, Gen Z Girl Gang, really at our core, our mission is to redefine sisterhood. And what that means to us in large part is recognizing that women and femmes have always found strength and success in our personal networks. And that for us to redefine success, right, we can't operate on this idea that rich white men always have of oppression, but rather of lifting each other up, collaboration. That's the way that we're going to find success. And so as you're embarking on your own journeys, your own time as a founder or a creator or a community builder, really thinking about how you can put those relationships at the forefront and prioritize them in your work is important.
Definitely. And I think when you hold that authenticity in your own work, others will be able to tell. And so more than the numbers and followers or people that have looked at your work, I think the way in which you hold your message and your mission proudly is something that will impact others and help you build that community moving forward. I would love to ask both of you, what is one thing that you regret or one thing that you wish you could have done differently when you look back on your on your activism journeys?
So I don't necessarily have any regrets, but what I will say is I wish that I wish that I had advocated for myself more in certain spaces and organizations that I'd been in at a much younger, much sooner. Because when I was younger, a lot of adults did run over me in organizations that I was a part of, and they made me feel like what I had to say wasn't as important or worthy because of my age. So I definitely do wish that I'd advocated for myself sooner and tapped into my power and walked in that unapologetically within those spaces. But now that I use my experience as a survivor of abuse in so many different ways, and it's from so many different settings, to educate other young folks on ways to avoid that, and really just shedding light on the experiences that we deal with in different organizations on a day-to-day basis, and helping to make sure that other young folks don't experience everything that I've had to survive navigating through so many different organizations and spaces. So yeah, that's really what I do wish I would have done. But I don't regret any of my experiences because they all make me who I am today.
Thank you.
I have a similar philosophy that because I am in a place that I'm happy with, that there's not much that I would change. Though one piece of advice I would give myself, and I think that this happens, I'm sure that you may have felt this pressure too, you being whoever's out there, that it feels like everyone is starting something. Even right now, right? Nupal's the founder of this, I'm the founder of that, Luna's founded this, and there's so much pressure to be like the founder of, to start something. And I've said this already, but let's not replicate work. Let's not start something to just start something. And I wish I had known this about myself sooner, but I couldn't have known it without going through the process that I did. And that's that I actually hate to be in charge of people. I don't like anyone in charge of me, and I don't like to be in charge of anybody. I love to be autonomous. And so running an organization is actually like one of the largest sources of stress and guilt and just like general anxiety in my life. And has been since I started Gen Z Girl Gang. And I wouldn't change it for anything because I learned this about myself. I've built an organization. I've helped cultivate the leadership of so many young women and femmes around me and created impactful programming. But there are so many things that I wish I had known before I jumped in the deep end on that. And again, I absolutely I'd already founded an organization through a different lens before founding this one. But I will say that, there is some value to really knowing yourself, knowing what you can take on, your capabilities, what you value, before jumping in the deep end. And that there's literally no rush. You deserve to have fun. You deserve to enjoy being a young person. And you're doing enough. You're doing enough. It's fine. You're doing enough. And like I said, each and every one of us has a very different way to contribute because we are each unique individuals with our own skills and strengths. And so get to know those first, and then let's figure out how to apply them.
That's such a good point. Yeah. All right. So Let's see here. Nupal, we have several questions for you from the audience. One of them was asking, how can I get people to care more about racism? Because I feel like some folks don't outwardly say racist things, but are apathetic because they don't notice racism in their lives and assume it's a thing of the past. Do you have any advice for this person?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. Well, as a Black or brown person, it is not your job to be white people's full-time educators on what racism is. Okay. But what I will say is I engage with people that are open-minded and actually want to learn. I can meet people where they are, but it is not my job to meet people who don't want to be met. Google is free. So with that being said, with us being in the digital age and the age of technology, there are so many ways for us to educate ourselves on the problems that we face today, and specifically racism. So it's not your job to get people to quote unquote care. Like, you cannot force somebody that does not care to care. But you can talk to people that genuinely don't understand, that genuinely are curious and want to learn more. I've spoken to old white people from the South, to people in the North. I've spoken to so many different people that have lived in so many different regions, and I've been able to meet them where they are. And so that's what I do. I approach every conversation with an open mind. And again, like, if these people are genuinely willing to listen and learn, then I'm here. I have no problem, answering questions or educating people on things that they need to be educated on. But again, don't put so much pressure on yourself trying to change the mindsets of people that just really don't want to change. That's not your job. But meet the folks that want to hear you, meet them where they are, have that uncomfortable and productive conversation, and keep it going.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think speaking on the idea of where to focus our energy as activists and change makers, I'd love to hear, maybe starting with Deja, you spoke to that balance of or that challenge of having these many different, what felt like full-time jobs. And so do you have any suggestions for our youth listening on how they can balance advocacy work with being a full-time student and other personal responsibilities they might have?
Yeah, this is such a hard question in that everyone has very different experiences, right? And so the first thing to know is that you're the only one with all the information about yourself, right? I can give you advice, I can give you my perspective, what I've done, but you know your capacity. You know what you need to take care of and where your energy needs to go. But I'll add that in my ideal world, I've already said this, all these young people would be getting paid well to do the work that they do, and they wouldn't have to worry about hustling on the side. I still am not in that position, right? I still do a lot of work on the side in terms of content creation, a very different kind of work, obviously. But I still live in this capitalist society, just like all of you. Like, we all still have bills to pay. And so when I think about how you create balance, I think we have to acknowledge that each of us has a different need to survive. Each of us is being pulled in different directions. And so one thing I would encourage everyone to think about is that everyone has those different needs. And so not to judge others activism, or if they're doing enough, or if they're contributing in the way that you want to see them contributing or expect them to, but rather to be understanding that we each have our own set of skills and our own circumstances that need to be met. And then if you're kind of considering how to balance things personally, I would say to create a support system. I've already told you one of the most stressful things in my life is being a founder, but the thing that has made it bearable, that's made me be able to continue sustaining this organization for over 2 years now, is that I trust the young women around me to pick up the slack. That when I need to set down the baton, they're there to pick it up. And that really is at the core of this work. Brea Baker, who Nupal and I both know and who's wonderful, once on a panel said with me that this work is neither a sprint nor a marathon, it's a relay race. And I think when I need a break, I know that my friends will pick up the baton. And so I'm not afraid to rest. I'm not afraid to say, I need to take a step back. I need to pay my bills this month, right? I know that there will be people there to catch me without judgment. And that when they need a break, I'll be there to catch them. And so again, that reminder that it is so much more about how we do what we do, how we build sustainable relationships and rely on one another and empower each other. That's how we create sustainable movements, and again, is how we create balance in our own lives.
I want to quickly echo something important that my sister just said, and that's in terms of not judging others and giving people grace. If you see something that you don't like that someone else is doing and they're an activist, instead of getting on social media to attack or quote unquote drag them and cancel them, you can go and you can find a way to fix that and do it yourself. If you see a problem and you don't like the way someone else is doing something, then you figure out solutions to go and change it, because there's not really much productivity happening when you're dragging, quote unquote, someone on social media. What really matters is the work and how you're showing up in it. So again, like if you see a problem, you don't like how someone else is doing that work, then you take the steps to fix it and do it how you would like to see it be done.
Thank you both for that. I think we have, we're already running out of time, but we have such great questions from the audience here. Let's see, I'll go over one more question from Bella, and I wanted to mention that Bella was also the one that asked the question before to you, Nupal. She's asking, how were you able, to Deja Fox, how were you able to get out of your financial situation and homelessness?
So one thing you have to understand about poverty is that it doesn't really stop. I'll be poor in my head for the rest of my life. Like, I've experienced poverty trauma. And being poor is actually the most expensive thing that's ever happened to me, whether it's paying for my dental bills because I didn't have a dentist from 8th grade till college, right? Like, there's so many ways that I am still, for example, my mom still lives in housing projects, that I'm still dealing with the consequences of being born poor. And so first and foremost, this idea of making it is fake. You can struggle and succeed at the same time. And now I wanna highlight that, yes, I have money in my bank account and I've worked really hard to make that happen for myself, but my family still doesn't own a home or a new car, right? I'm still miles behind my peers at Columbia whose families come from generational wealth. And so when I think about this question of how I at least escaped, what it was to feel like I was living in survival mode, to be reliant on others for my housing, in large part, that was based on community and education. So 2 things. One, when I was homeless, when I didn't have a place to live, I relied on community. I shared for the first time that I didn't have these things at home. And my friends, my counselors, people opened up their homes to me. And now that is still experiencing homelessness as a young person bouncing around, not living in a home of your own is still homelessness. And then, I went on to school, and I moved to New York City. It's kind of a funny story. The first week, a week before Columbia would let me move into my dorm, because I was doing the Fashion Week event and I couldn't afford to buy a second ticket. So they flew me out to New York and I had nowhere to live for a week until I could move into my dorm. So I was still homeless. Then I was doing Fashion Week events. I was admitted to a Columbia and Ivy League school, and I was still homeless. And so I say all of that to say that this idea of getting out isn't as clean cut as I'd like to think, or anyone else would. But ways that I've built financial freedom for myself are, again, by asking others for help, by finding a school that was going to cover 100% of my demonstrated need and really support me. And then by really leaning into financial opportunities that came my way, and then being able to create them not only for myself, but for my friends. Now I'm in a position where I create campaigns, paid campaigns, and I hire my friends to do them. I'm in a position where I'm hiring young folks to work with me at my organization. And so I say all of that to say that financial freedom is the goal. Because I know that economic justice is a part of the work that I do, but that I deserve financial freedom as well. And so, yeah, there's no easy how-to because I'm still trying to get out.
Yeah, I'm still in the hood. Like I told y'all earlier, I still live in Brownsville with my mom and my 5 younger brothers. I'm the oldest out of 6 in a single parent household and the only girl. So navigating growing up in Brownsville and also being a survivor of homelessness as well due to domestic violence. My family and I have lived in DV shelters. We bounced place to place. Like we've been through all of that. And it definitely was not easy, navigating that while also still continuing my work as an activist and organizer and working to get to college because throughout majority of my high school career, it consisted of instability and homelessness due to situations beyond my control. But by the grace of God and so many others within my community, I was able to make it to Hampton University as a first generation college student. And now I am absolutely so proud to say that I am graduating from my illustrious institution with a bachelor's in poli-sci, and I'm getting ready to go to law school right now. So I've been studying nonstop for the LSAT and not since December. And now in 2022, I'll be entering, fingers crossed, into my first choice, which is Howard University. So it's not easy navigating poverty. It's not easy being a first generation student. And a lot of times we deal with a lot of guilt, like the survivor's guilt that I deal with from making it out of the hood. It's real. Like when I first got to college, I beat myself up so many times because it's like I'm here at Hampton University in this college place that is a safe haven. I don't have to deal with gun violence on a day-to-day basis every single day. I feel safe walking down my campus block, but my family members that still live here can't say the same thing. So I felt guilty. And I used to call my mom all freshman year, crying every single day because quite frankly, my peers are really, really wealthy. A lot of the people that go to my school are really wealthy. So for the first time in my life, I'm around so many like wealthy Black people from different backgrounds of life. And I just didn't know how to adjust my first semester of freshman year. Man, I didn't feel like I belonged there. And my mom, I remember this powerful conversation I had with my mom when I broke down to her. And I was like, I just don't know if I can do this. I just don't feel like I belong here. And my mama told me that just because you don't come from wealth and you're not rich does not mean that you don't deserve to be there just as much as them. It doesn't mean that you didn't work just as hard, if not harder, given the circumstances that we've had to navigate to get there. It does not mean that you don't deserve to be there. You are more than worthy of taking up that space and taking every single opportunity that's thrown your way and running with it. And from that day on, that's exactly what I've done. I've taken every opportunity I've had given to me and I ran with it. And I also created more opportunities for other people along the way. So I'm the table and the chairs. And when I walk into a room, everyone has to recognize that, and they do. They recognize my power, and I walk with my head held high. It does not matter if I don't have $1 million or I didn't come from billions or trillions of dollars. I'm still going to walk into every single room with my head held high, and you will respect me and the power and expertise that I bring into that space.
Thank you, Nicole. Very powerful words. Thank you so much. We have unfortunately run out of time, but I have the sense that you both could talk for hours and give so much wonderful and deep wisdom. But it's been an honor to listen to everything you had to offer, and thank you so much for sharing those really rich and personal experiences with us. And thank you to the Wild Airs for those incredible questions. We are truly inspired to have you here, and you're such role models for all of us, including myself. So we can't wait to see all of the incredible things you will continue to achieve. I think it's really great messaging you've brought to us about the importance of collective activism and supporting other activists, as well as the idea of truly listening and trusting yourself to find that balance and what brings you that sense of personal fulfillment. So thank you both so much, and it was an honor to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Thank you both.